And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
Yo, Lord willing, Jeff Canarsie, Mob Talk Radio. Check it out. Yo, we stay quiet like Russell Buffalino when things will get ugly like Pepsi's death in Casino. Who do we know? No one, nobody. But we're all well respected like Della Croce and Gotti. I know wild nights, Havana nocturne. Light up a cigar and watch the spot burn. You'll get patty whacked, I'm tough like Irish dock workers. Run with guys, hooligans and block lurkers. Corner berserkers, street savvy soldiers. You owe, you better pay. Don't make me say I told you. Code you don't betray, I say what I mean. Providence and Brooklyn all the way to the bean. I'd rather be unseen, like Vinny the Chin. I don't gotta go to Vegas to see cities of sin. Pull the pin, drop bombs like Danny Green. I write homicide like the murder machine. Lansky Luciano, mastermind the racket. Up in the clam house with a million in my jacket.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I'm your host, Jeff Canarsie. We got a big one today. We're going to do a little bit of a Q&A, and then we are going to get to the second part of the Kennedy show. Now, for those that are wondering about why the delay, I am probably going to release the Detroit show this week. I'm also going to probably tonight release an Appalachian radio show, which sort of digests everything that happened there and how it happened, because I'm getting a lot of questions as to why it happened, who were the players and stuff like that. Just a little, just some different things I'm going to release. Anyway, so what we're going to do is there are some news and notes that I could cover, but I'm not going to get into that because this is a big show and I want to make sure I get it out by the end of the day today, and then late tonight I'll probably release another one. We're going to try to keep December very, very, very busy. But once again, I apologize for the delay. In the meantime, if you want a Flanagan shirt, go to omertamia.com, omertamia.com. Type in the Flanagans, type in Mob Talk in all caps in the code section. You get 20% off your total purchase. Other than that, you can follow us on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. You can check us out on Facebook, Mob Talk Radio, etc., etc. For those that are sending bulk messages, I am not taking message requests on Twitter anymore for a lot of different reasons, except from a couple of people. So really the only way you're going to be able to get a hold of me is by going to the Mob Talk Radio page over on Facebook and send me a message. That's just the only way I'm going to do it from now on, mainly because between Facebook and Twitter, I cannot keep up. I have 400 and, what is it? Hold on, let me look at my phone. I have 462 messages on Facebook I haven't even gotten to, if that tells you the volume that I deal with. Now, right before we start, like I said, we're going to get into a Q&A. I did post a Q&A thing over on Facebook. You can start typing in your questions there. But there is one thing I kind of want to talk about, and I'm not going to get long-winded, and I'm not even going to get really specific about it just because it's fucking nonsense. And I'm not going to mention any names just because it's so irrelevant to everything. But there were a lot of rumors that I had a problem somewhere. First of all, I didn't have a problem anywhere. I don't know what anybody's talking about. Every once in a while, I get messages from people who pick up gossip somewhere, and it's amazing to me how fucked up and wrong the gossip is. It was not even accurate. There was a name mentioned in this message, and what's hilarious to me about it is that the person they mentioned, I'm friends with. Never had no problems with that person, this person, that person. Every once in a while, you will get somebody who has a fucking gossip story they've heard, and they run with it, and they fucking put shit on social media, and it's not accurate. The other thing is, I'm not going to talk about any sort of things that happen because it's nobody's fucking business. But I can tell you I got no problems. Listen, some people like what I do. Some people don't like what I do. Some people get offended by the shit I do, and I get it. I understand it. But once again, any rumors of being physically touched by anybody is just absolute fucking nonsense. If that were the case, I would tell you. I'm not going to hide that. But it just goes to show that the haterade and the haters that are all over social media are going to continue to spin narratives and tell bullshit stories. And that's fine. You're entitled to do that. But once again, if something's valid and I need to like bring it up and I need to talk about it, then I'm going to do that. I'm not afraid of nobody. It was funny because there was a conversation I loosely had with somebody who I didn't really know. I mean, I knew of, but I didn't really know. And the context of that conversation was that, you know, this person said to me, "You don't seem afraid." I said, "I'm not fucking afraid. What am I going to be afraid of?" And the person looks at me and says, "But that's what your problem is you're not." listen, I'm not afraid of anybody. I never have. I never will be. I don't give a shit who gets angry with me. I can be respectful and I can like talk shit out with people. If you've got a problem or a beef, that's what I'll do. But at the end of the day, listen, what I do is not going to please everybody, and I don't give a fuck about any of that. You either like me or you don't like me. You're either going to get to know me on a personal level or you're not. If you want to go and compare me to other people and whatever, that's your prerogative, that's your choice. But anybody that thinks I'm going to back down from anybody or take a backward step to anybody, you're out of your fucking mind. That's not bravado. That's not me being tough. That's just who I am in general. So you can't please everybody, and I've told stories before of some things that have happened to me along this path of doing this show. You can't make everybody happy. Some people love what you do, and they're nice about it. Some people don't. You have old schoolers, you have new schoolers, and then everybody in between. So for all the rumors and gossip, like I always tell everybody, if you're hearing shit and you want to bring it to my attention, fine. 9 times out of 10, I'm not going to pay it no mind because I just don't have time in my life to like circumvent all the gossip, rumors, and bullshit that people think that they hear. And it seems to be coming out of one place all the time, and it is what it is. But nothing's happened. There's no drama to speak of. There's no names to mention. There's no players. It's just it was something that was just, I think, sort of circulated amongst people that do nothing but fucking gossip like cunts, and then it gets out of control, and it's like the telephone game where you say one thing on one side of the room, and by the time it reaches the other, it's a bunch of nonsense and bullshit, and that's what it is. I don't got no problems. I'm not fucking afraid of anybody. I don't care who the fuck you are. I don't live my life in fear of anybody. I don't fear any man, and that's just the bottom line and the truth. And that's just how I live my life. Now, some people may say that's fucking stupid of me, but at the end of the day, I just don't care. If somebody's got a problem, an issue, and they want to talk it out like a gentleman, by all means, I will do that all day long. But if that's not the stance you're going to take, then you're not going to get any respect out of me. And that's just the truth. That's how I operate. That's how I've always been since I was a kid. So, it is what it is. So stop listening to the nonsense and gossip. It's ridiculous. So with that, we're going to get to the Q&A. I only took about 30 questions today, I think, and then we're going to get to the second part of the Kennedy show. So let's begin right here with question number 1. How do you rank Frank Nitti as a boss? How was Rica and Accardo able to force him to step down, especially being a boss who was so respected in the Capone era? Where did Nitti go wrong? Well, first of all, Nitti was really never truly in charge, I don't think. I think it was a position that he was put in, sort of a front boss kind of structure. And Nitti was a bit of a fucking maniac. He had a lot of mental problems. I think today they would, I don't want to like put a title on it like a bipolar thing or whatever, but I think Nitti I think Nitti had a lot of mental illness issues. And I also think he never really was the boss. I think there were other people behind the scenes sort of telling him what to do. And I think that's just the nature of it. We actually did a show on Frank Nitti, which we talked about that a little bit. So go on YouTube. Type in Mob Talk Radio, type in Frank Nitti, it'll pull up, you can listen to it, and I talked a little bit about Frank Nitti as a boss, and I talked about his mental illness and stuff like that. All right, here we go. Why is Michael Franzese saying that Frank Sheeran in the Irishman story is false? He's claiming he knows for sure that Sheeran did not kill Hoffa. Michael Franzese is the biggest windbag, lying, sack of shit, rat motherfucker that's ever lived. Now, for those that continue to fucking say Michael Franzese is not a rat, I posted his fucking 302. If you don't know what a 302 is, it's essentially a memorialization of when you sit down with the FBI and you give them details of crimes for a lesser sentence. Michael Franzese got a lesser sentence. That's number 1. Number 2, he gave up names, crimes, murders, etc. It is in the 302 that I posted that he is agreeing to a deal for lesser time shaved off his sentence for giving the FBI information on other people. That's a fucking rat. It's a fucking rat move. Anybody that sits down with the FBI that is from the streets is a fucking rat. I don't give a fuck. We can argue the parameters of that. If you sit down and you sign a fucking 302, you're a rat. That's it. There's no other way around it. And I know that there are people in this world that have done things like this. And where the argument loses its basis for me, and I've never really said this before. This is going to be the first time that I've really said this. But if you're from somebody, a good friend of mine, who is from Philadelphia, I had dinner with. And, he explained it in a way that nobody has really ever explained it. And sort of his way of looking at things is, okay, so somebody sits down and talks to the FBI. That's point number one. Number two, they do a 302. Now, is it possible the FBI can fucking lie on a 302? Absolutely. I'm throwing caution to the wind with this. But here's the thing, and this is what my friend told me. And by the way, if my friend is listening, I appreciate your friendship. He knows who he is. But he says to me, listen, guys from the streets, right? If you're in the street and he's in the street, and you sit down and you talk to the FBI and you give them information on shit, regardless of whether it's good, bad, indifferent, didn't lead to you testifying, didn't lead to this, what does that make you? And I looked at him and I says, a rat. And he's like, there you go. There's no way you can argue your way out of that. Street guys do not talk to cops. Street guys do not make meetings to talk with fucking the FBI. So in Michael Francise's case, he's a rat. He testified against Norby Walters, a fucking janitor, put them behind the fucking wall. He gave up made guys' names. He gave up family structures. And I posted his 302. So he can sit there and say all this crazy shit, but at the end of the day, Michael's a fucking rat. He knows he's a fucking rat. He can go to Jesus and do whatever the fuck he wants to do. But he's another guy that likes to make up shit. He said a lot of shit about John Gotti Sr., which wasn't true. He tries to insert himself, like other rats, like Sammy Gravano, into crimes and other things that try to make his public persona sort of look bigger. At the end of the day, he was a yuppie. He made money. We can't argue that. But he makes a lot of claims that are just absolutely hilarious. They can be refuted time and time again. I don't think he knew Frank Sheeran. I don't think he knew Jimmy Hoffa. I don't think he really knows a lot of anything, but he's living off his father's name. If it's not because of his father, believe me, this guy is persona non grata. Did he earn? Sure. Was he deadly? No. From everybody I know that knew him in those days said he was a pussy and pretty much leaned on his father's name to keep him safe. And so I can go on all day about this, but Francis doesn't know anything. He inserts himself and says he knows things and people and places, but he really doesn't. He's just trying to keep the fucking mob persona going. Now, here's my argument, right? And this is the final thing I want to say about this prick, is that if you're going to be a man of God and you're going to collect money for your bullshit speeches and call it God the Father and all of this stupid shit, the fuck are you doing standing up glorifying the mafia? You can't have it both ways. You're either a man of God or you're a street guy. Which one is it? He's a rat. That's what he is. He's full of shit. I wouldn't give the guy fucking 3 cents of my money. I'm waiting for him to start selling the fucking holy oil that you get in the mail every month. Send me $10 and I'll send you the holy oil. Rub it on a dollar bill. It turns into 20. That's the kind of guy he is. It's a scam what he's doing. The guy's garbage. He's just garbage. And the thing is he's into making money, right, with the God thing. So, of course, he wants to insert himself into the fucking Irishman because it's a big hit and et cetera, et cetera. So that's pretty much what it is. All right. You bring up a good point, first stating maybe they shouldn't have taken out Bobby Kennedy, but then you said actually it would have been better if they took out the old man first. If they had taken out Joe, they never would have had a problem with the Kennedys. Absolutely right. Couldn't agree more. To kill a snake, you chop off its head, and that's just the truth. All right. Someone I haven't heard you mention before is Tony Ducks Corallo. What are your thoughts on him? I heard that Minnesota, specifically St. Paul, was a mob safe haven. Is there still a mob presence in Minnesota? I did a show on Tony Ducks Corallo. Go to YouTube, type in Tony Ducks, and I did a whole entire show on him. As far as a mob presence in Minnesota, it's there still, but it's probably not what it was. Rumors, street rumors are still that the Capra-Patterson crime family still runs things. And they have always sort of been sanctioned by the Genovese crime family, and the Twin Cities is sort of controlled by the Genoveses. But look, there's always a fringe group here and there, but it's just not like it was. Minnesota has had organized crime all the way back since the 1900s, but it really wasn't until 1919 when the Prohibition, which was the 18th Amendment, got passed, and that's when everybody really... any fringe hoodlums really become powerful gangsters because of Prohibition. The early days of Minnesota organized crime was mainly Irish guys, and they were flanked by Jewish guys. Politics, corruption, cops, judges, lawyers, all of that stuff was owned by the mob in those days. Perhaps one of the most famous guys to ever come out of that area was Isidore Bloomfeld. He was also known as Kid Can. and he sort of begins his career as a pimp and a nickel and dime hood from the North Side, which ultimately he would become a godfather in like sort of every sense of the word. But he had very close ties to the Chicago outfit. And like I said, Minnesota's long been sort of Chicago turf as well as Genovese turf. And so there's some other notable names that you can look up with Minnesota organized crime. Deuce Casper, Perry Malik. There's a whole bunch of guys you can look up, and I don't want to get into the entirety of those names, but Minnesota has a very lengthy organized crime history. All right. I know Rudy Giuliani was credited with the big mob bust when he was a prosecutor, but I always was curious if Rudy himself had mob ties. First of all, I don't like fucking Rudy Giuliani. I think he's a piece of shit. I think he's a fucking massive hypocrite. I think he looks like fucking Dracula, Nosferatu, whatever the fuck. I'm waiting for him to start sucking Donald Trump's blood out of his neck on live TV. But Rudy Giuliani's father and his uncle had serious mob ties. His uncle Leo Diavanzo, his uncle Lee Diavanzo ran a loan sharking and gambling operation out of a bar in Brooklyn. His father Harry was actually a mob debt collector. It beat a ton of fucking people up. In fact, both Diavanzo and his father Harry were involved in a shootout with another member of the mob in the 60s over a loan shark dispute. The guy that they were actually in a dispute with was a made guy named Jimmy Dano. You can look up Jimmy Dano. It's also worth noting that Rudy Giuliani's cousin is Lee Diavanzo, who is married to Drita from Mob Wives. So there's a connection there. They're related. But Rudy's whole entire family was always mobbed up. So it's kind of a hypocrite that he goes after the mob and then throws these fucking Godfather watch parties. So he's a hypocrite in every sense of the word. And I think we're seeing now, and I'm not going to get political with it, but I think we're seeing now what a fucking scumbag he is. Just with the lies and the criminality. And it always amazes me that these guys, even Buddy Cianci in Providence was the same way. You know, would go after the mafia, attack the mafia, this, that, and the third. Ultimately, Buddy Cianci gets pinched and goes to federal prison for crimes, high crimes and misdemeanors, or whatever they want to call it. But listen, the government is a bunch of fucking criminals. The cabinet, Congress, they're all fucking criminals, right? So it shouldn't shock anybody that there are ties to Rudy Giuliani, a.k.a. Nosferatu. All right. In The Godfather of Harlem, Bumpy Johnson goes up against the Chin. Did this really happen? Absolutely, unequivocally, no. Did Costello do any business with the Chin after he was shot by him on Vito Genovese's orders? No, they really didn't have no ties after that. Did Chin get looked down on other mob bosses because he was Vito's driver? No, I don't think he did, because the Chin took over the way that he always sort of took over everything. But at the end of the day, no. This Bumpy Johnson story that they got playing, I think it's on HBO or Showtime. I'm not really sure. I won't even watch it. It's bullshit. None of it. This is, once again, them trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. Bumpy Johnson was not that fucking big. He was not that fucking powerful. And I think it's just a Hollywood bastardized version of what the truth is. As far as Costello never forgot what Vinny the Chin did, but I think a lot of what Costello realized was that Vito Genovese was behind it, and he would get even with Genovese in the end, and he did. But I don't think he ever really held it totally against Vinny Gigante, just because business is business. You know, it is what it is. Frank could have turned around and dropped a dime on Vinny in court, and he didn't. He couldn't remember who shot him. And it's long been said that as the Chin was on his way out of court, he said, "Thanks, Frank." So there you go. All right. Do you think that Frank Sheeran really whacked Jimmy Hoffa? I cannot give you an 100% guarantee on any of that. Listen, I've said this before, and here's the thing. So I wasn't around in them days, wasn't hanging out with them guys. I think there's a lot of people that don't believe that story necessarily. And listen, everybody's got their opinion, but the mere fact that Frank Sheeran was that tight with Jimmy Hoffa and Russell Buffalino, I don't think you can take him out of the mix. If he didn't kill him, I can guarantee you he knows who did, and he knew enough about it that he would have information. I think there's a lot of things that Frank Sheeran said that can be disputed, but I also think there's a lot of things he said that nobody can dispute and that are backed up by actual physical evidence and backed up by what. And I'm not saying the FBI tells the truth, because God knows they don't, but I think there are a lot of things, because I've looked at hundreds of files, and it's just the dots just connect. So do I think Frank Sheeran whacked him? Maybe he didn't. Maybe he didn't. I like to think he probably did because he was the only one that could get close to Jimmy Hoffa like that. But that doesn't mean that that's true. Do I think it was somebody from Detroit? No. Do I think it was this guy or that guy? No. I think Frank Sheeran, in reality, after seeing the movie, reading the book, and looking at a lot of court documents and FBI documents, I think Frank Sheeran knew a lot about a lot of things. I think the mere fact that he was loyal to both of them for as long as he could be, Hoffa and Buffalino, but ultimately he sides with Buffalino. I think the idea that he knew what happened to Hoffa, I think he did. Does that mean he shot him? Not necessarily, but it makes sense in a certain narrative because Jimmy Hoffa never would have gone anywhere without protection because he was very shaky because of the Tony Provenzano stuff that was going on and the mob was pissed at him. So I think if we're going to believe anything, I think the reality is here that I think it's more likely that Frank Sheeran did have something to do with it than him not having anything to do with it. But like I said, I wasn't there. History, you're never going to find his body. You're never going to find evidence. I would be shocked if they found him buried in some yard somewhere like I keep hearing the nonsense, from other people. So there you go. Let's see. Where there was a mob family in Baltimore, what kind of rackets do you think they had? I'm guessing they had stuff going on at the port, but what else would they have going on? The port, gambling, loan sharking, narcotics, pimping. I mean, anything. Listen, just because you're in Baltimore, you're in South Philadelphia, you're in Providence, you're in Boston, Chicago, doesn't fuck New York. It doesn't matter where you're at. The rackets are all the same. The rackets are all the same. They never change. Anything that's not locked down with fucking Kevlar is getting stolen. Anything you could sell, you're going to sell. It's just organized crime is that way. Rackets are always the same. They're always the same, and they're never going to change. All right, a few years ago, members of the Outfit's Grand Avenue crew got busted robbing drug dealers. Has that ever happened in New York or Philadelphia? Yeah, of course. I mean, I could sit here and talk about 20 different instances where mob guys fucking robbed drug dealers, broke into houses. Any way they could get money, any way they could do certain things, they're going to do it. The only thing that I would tell you, and the only thing that I would probably say that would be different, was I don't think anybody in Philadelphia or anybody that's in those circles is going to break into a house. I don't think they're those type of criminals. I don't think they're them type of guys. Look, even organized crime guys have fucking standards. I know that sounds crazy coming from me, but I think that they have certain standards and certain things are beneath them. And listen, breaking into a house and robbing a drug dealer can create a lot of problems. Drug dealers absolutely busting in houses, probably not so. All right, who are the bigger jerk-offs? The people that hate on you for having your own show but still listen to you, or Anastasia, Ratweiser, or Previty? I'm not really understanding the crux of this question, but really the biggest jerk-offs, I don't care if people hate on me, because they never hate on me to me. They always hate on me from other people. But the bigger jerk-offs, if I had to compare it between people I know that hate on me or Ratweiser or Anastasia, probably Ratweiser is the biggest jerk-off I've ever fucking had the experience of even looking at. The guy's a jerk off. I am not, I am definitely not like Dave Ratweiser in any sense of the word. I think anybody that knows me will tell you that. But the biggest jerk offs, I think, are the pussies that sit in these little chat rooms and talk shit about everybody in South Philly. There's a specific chat room they do this in. It's fucking garbage. It's jerk off stuff. And what's funny to me is that if any one of these little pricks that sits in these fucking chat rooms and does this shit, like ran into any of these guys, they'd shit their fucking pants. But I think the biggest jerk off is Ratweiser. I mean, that's, that and wannabes. Anybody that's a wannabe and tries to drop a name, and I've said this 100 fucking times, if you got to drop a fucking name and you got to mention somebody's name because that name gives you a reputation, then you're not a man. If you can't live off your own reputation, then you're not a man. Anybody that has to mention spooky gookie or whatever the fuck it is, and try to intimidate somebody from fucking with them, then you're really not a tough guy. You're a bitch. That's just how I see things. All right, do Chicago guys interest you enough to do an episode on them? I've done a ton of Chicago shows. Go over on YouTube and just check out there's over 100 and some shows at this point. I've talked about it, Paul Rica, I think a bunch of different Chicago guys, Al Capone. Just go ahead and check those out over on Facebook. All right, in your opinion, what's a realistic good run at a street boss? 5 to 10 years? Because it seems like a lot of a lot of bosses don't get past the 5 to 10 year mark anymore. No, you're right. And a lot of that is counter surveillance and the way the FBI surveils, wiretaps, and more. A realistic good run. Listen, I've always said this to everybody that I may know in certain circles. If you could get a 6 to 7 year run and put $1 million away, what the fuck you keep doing it for? A lot of it's ego, a lot of it's bravado. They want to keep doing it. And I've always said, if you could put a number attached to whatever you're doing, you could be a fucking desk clerk for all I give a fuck. But if you put a number as to what you need to get out, get done, and just be done with it, do it. If it's $1 million, fine. If it's $500,000, go ahead. Put that $500,000 number in your head. Once you get there, stop and walk. But we see this time and time again. It always sort of vexes me of these guys who are running shit for 7 to 9 years and they've made $5-6 million. They got a fucking $12 million house. They got the big boat and they just don't stop. How much is enough? And a lot of that is ego. And I'm not saying I would be any better at that kind of shit because money is money. But I think if you live within your means, you don't buy the flashy shit, and you just keep it on lockdown and you reach a certain number and get the fuck out, I think you would see a lot more bosses being able to go surpass 5 and 10 years if they lived like that and they did that, but they don't and they get caught, and that's usually how it ends. All right, do you think that Jimmy Hoffa Jr. has been controlled or influenced by the mob at any time since he's been president of the Teamsters? Absolutely. I don't think there's any way that Jimmy Hoffa Jr. hasn't been controlled in some sort of fashion. Can I prove it? No. Does the mob still run the Teamsters? You better believe it. But I don't think that the Teamsters have become a squeaky clean union that is not corrupt. I just don't think it's possible. All right. With the Irishman out, now people are coming out with new revelations about who killed Jimmy Hoffa and where he's buried. Philip Moscato was saying that his father told him on his deathbed that Sally Buggs was the trigger man and he knows where he's buried. Why now? Why do people think Frank Sheeran's story is so unbelievable? If Sheeran was so full of shit, why was he so well respected? Well, it's funny. Ralph Natale said that Frank Sheeran was a nobody, but in reality, Ralph Natale was a fucking nobody. So you got to consider the source. I think a lot of people don't want to believe anything Frank Sheeran said because it's an Irish guy. If the guy's name was Vinny Esposito or Carmine Fatico or John Gotti or whatever the fuck the case may be, people believe that. They have a hard time, I think, accepting that an Irish guy who was close to Russell Buffalino and close to Jimmy Hoffa could have anything to do with anything. I think that's a lot of why it is. And I think it's because people just can't accept how readily easy it is. Everybody, when you talk about conspiracy theories and all of this stuff, if the conspiracy comes easy to accept, easy to believe, people don't want to believe it. Everything's got to be so difficult. You got to connect A to Z, B to F, and it just... The point is, I think because this comes so easily for people, I think it's hard for them to just accept it. Do I believe what Philip Moscato says? Absolutely not. I think he's making it up. His father could have actually told him that, but I don't think that that's realistic. Why come out now? Why not? Because the Irishman is out. So he has to come out and say that. If he comes out and says that, he gets publicity, he gets fame, he gets attention, and that's what people want. So am I saying that his story is wrong? No. Was he told a lie? I'm sure you're never going to find Jimmy Hoffa's body. You can trust me on that. If they do, well, then I'll have to live with that the rest of my life, that I said this guy was full of shit. But the other thing worth noting with this is that if that were truly the case and he had certifiable information, don't you think the FBI would be out in a field with a backhoe right now digging a motherfucker up? Because that's what the FBI does. They want to fucking solve this. They have multiple times been out to farm fields in fucking Michigan looking for Jimmy Hoffa. Never found shit. And it was tips from people that were well known and tips from people that were lesser well known. But he's only coming out now because the Irishman is out and he wants notoriety. People don't want to believe Frank Sheeran because it's just too easy. It's sometimes murder is very simple. You shoot somebody, you kill them, it's over with. You don't have to have the intangibles to understand that. And Frank Sheeran was completely respected. He was very tight with Russell Buffalino and Angelo Bruno and a lot of other people. So if people want to say he wasn't respected, you got to ask them, what are they getting out of coming forward and saying that? What? Because they want the notoriety? So there you go. All right. If the FBI even suspects someone is in the mob, do they have to get court approval to start surveillance, or can they just do what they want? Do do you know anyone or any funny stories about the FBI having someone under surveillance and the lengths that they would go to try and catch them committing criminal activities? The FBI has their normal standards. They'll dig through the garbage. They'll fucking fake that you're utility workers, package handlers from UPS, knock on your door. You got guys like Ratweiser, who's not a cop. He might as well be a fucking cop, who peeks over the fence. He filmed fucking Uncle Joe Lagambi, son of himself, films him sitting in his shorts reading the paper in his house. I mean, who fucking does that? But do I have any specific stories? Not really. But listen, suspicion, all they have to do is suspect you. They're supposed to get, wiretap stuff from judges, and sometimes they do that. But a lot of the stuff that they kind of do, and I've always made this argument for it, right? So they banned radar detectors so that you can't see where a cop is, you can't detect a cop. But yet, if they're going to hide in the fucking bushes on the side of the fucking road, then I should be able to have a radar detector. Let's make it a fucking game. You're going to hide in the fucking weeds over there and stick your little gun out the window. All right, well, then I'm going to use my radar detector and totally bypass you. So that's sort of my thing, and that's the way I've always thought. I think if you're going to be a criminal, I think the playing field should be leveled just a little bit. If they're going to be able to wiretap, then you should be able to know that. We are going to wiretap you, but listen, in a perfect world, that wouldn't happen, but they're supposed to get court approval to do a lot of the shit they do. But I think we're finding now, especially with today's climate, how fucked up the FBI is. All right, do you believe Philip Moscato's Jr.'s story on where Hoffa was buried and moved? No, I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. I don't believe it. And that's the end of that. Is there any evidence or connection Is there any evidence or a connection that is connected to RFK with the assassination that can be mob-related? We're actually going to talk about that on the show today. We're going to talk about Bobby Kennedy getting whacked, and we're going to talk about the who, what, where, why, and how. All right, did you ever watch that Mike Russell documentary, HBO Undercover Mafia? If so, do you know anything about the gangsters they were filming? I have seen it years ago, but I don't know who they were following. I think it was probably Genovese guys, just given where they were at in Manhattan when they were shooting that, but I don't know specifically, no. All right, who were the triggermen that killed Castellano? I'm not going to get into all of that. I think that it's very public who was sort of involved in that, and I'm not going to rat nobody out, dime nobody out. And if you want to find out, do your own research. Was the Willie Boy Johnson hit sanctioned by Paul Castellano, or did Gotti's crew act on their own? I don't think it mattered what Paul Castellano wanted at that point. He ratted on Gotti. Therefore, Gotti was going to kill him, and it's as simple as that. A rat is a rat is a rat. That does not always... A rat getting killed does not got to be sanctioned by a boss. Usually it's sanctioned by the captains, and they do what they got to do, and a boss is not going to not be in favor of killing a rat. All right. Do you think it's a rat move or a strategy when a mobster drops a dime on another mobster to get them arrested, to get them off the streets just to go after their rackets? Yeah, a rat's a rat's a rat. You talk to the cops and you give up somebody else, it's a fucking rat move. We saw Luciano do it. We saw Costello do it. Carlo Gambino did it. And that was a time period where they were doing these things back and forth to each other. It still doesn't make it right. It's still kind of a rat move. I'm not calling Carlo Gambino a rat, but I'm saying is if you go to the DEA and you drop a dime on somebody or give them information or supplant information to get somebody off the streets and get them in jail, it's a rat move. You can't, there's no distinction that you can make that doesn't make it that. All right, is there anything positive to be said about the mafia? Yeah, they protect their neighborhoods, at least in the old days. They take care of those around them. They take care of neighbors. They're good for the fucking economy. That's for sure. I'm just going to leave it at that. All right. I heard through the grapevine that John DiFranzo was a confidential informant. That's why he was never charged in the family secrets trial. Do you know anything about this? No. I've heard it before, but nobody's able to provide it. Listen, some guys are very lucky. They don't get tied up in indictments for whatever the fucking reason may be, right? Then there's other guys that get caught on wiretaps and get in a lot of trouble, get photoed, get seen, get fingered in crimes, and they never get arrested. And you got to wonder, they a snitch, they a rat, because you're not getting pinched. But sometimes it's the luck of the draw. Sometimes you get very lucky, and they may have enough evidence, but just not enough to put you away. The FBI doesn't want to put you away for a year. They want to put you away for 20 fucking years. So if they don't feel like they have enough, they're not going to indict. They're going to wait till they build more. Then they're going to come back with a sweeping indictment and try to put you away the rest of your life. That's how they operate. That's how they work. So Unless anybody can show me paperwork that DeFranco was a rat, I'm not going to buy it. All right, why do you think the mafia never took off properly in Los Angeles? I think a lot of it is because of the Hollywood studios. I think a lot of it is because of just the banking system, the Jewish people there. And I'm not saying Jewish people are bad, please, because some asshole's going to hear this and go, oh, now he doesn't like Jewish people. That's not what I'm saying. I just think that, especially with Mickey Cohen there, who was of Jewish religion, he had a firm, tight grip on things. And I think L.A. is just it's not set up like New York, Chicago, Philadelphia. It's a very different place. I don't think that L.A. is or ever has been a seriously ethnic place as far as Italian enclaves, Irish enclaves. And so I think it's just a different place. It's a different thing. I don't think that they had nearly the sort of businesses that they have in other states. And so I think a lot of it too was, you had Jack Dragna, who was fighting Mickey Cohen, and, the New York guys tried to get involved out there. Chicago tried to get involved out there, but it just never really stuck. And I can't give you a 1, 2, 3 answer for that. I could just tell you that I think a lot of it is because it's just a different setting. All right, what's the difference between a street gang and organized crime? Have you seen the show Gomorrah? Is it a real portrayal? Yeah, Gomorrah is absolutely as real as it gets. I think it's very, very, very realistic as far as what goes on in Italy. As far as the difference between a street gang and organized crime is organized. Street gangs often aren't. There's a hierarchy to organized crime that doesn't exist in anything else. I think we're seeing today, like the Latin Kings specifically, are trying to organize themselves a lot like mafia families. And when you do that, you're insulating yourself. A lot of these street gangs, it's a me sort of. It's not about the gang itself. It's about yourself. It's about what you want. And I think when you compare that to like a mafia family, it's still truly about the guy at the top getting all the money, but you're in a family and you stick together. And I think street gangs sort of have this mentality of all me, all me, all me. It's not one for all and all for one. It's just me, 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 me. And I think that if they structured themselves like typical organized crime and the guy at the top insulated himself away from everything, I think that they would probably be a lot more prolific in certain, and some gangs are, don't get me wrong, but I think all gangs would be more prolific if they just structured themselves differently. All right, do you think Frank Scalise really sold mafia memberships? 100% absolutely yes. Do you think Anastasia was involved in it as well? Absolutely 100% yes. Unequivocally yes. All right, I saw an interview with Gianni Russo. Did he really bang Marilyn Monroe, and how connected was he? Wasn't connected, didn't bang Marilyn Monroe, did not know Francesco Calli. He likes to tell everybody, oh, I knew Frank Calli. He was from Sicily. No, asshole. If you knew anything, you'd know he was from New York. He has roots in Sicily, but he was not born in Sicily. That guy Gianni Russo's another jerk-off, another hack who doesn't know anything, doesn't know anybody. He's like fucking in the last couple years of his life. He looks like a fucking smoke filter, a cigarette filter, and he's just trying to get some notoriety at the end of his life. And then that's fine. You want to do that, that's fine. But, if he truly was who he says he is, truly knew the people he says he knew, then he would probably just keep his fucking mouth shut, because that's what stand-up guys do. They just don't talk. All right, do you think Salvi Testa if Salvi Testa had actually married Joey Merlino's sister, would they have teamed up and took over the crime family? No, I don't think so. I listen, and I don't want to put words in Joey Merlino's mouth, but I think if we're going to believe what the FBI alleges, which is beyond fucking ridiculous at this point about Joey Merlino, but we're not going to know, because Salvi Testa didn't marry Joey Merlino's sister for whatever. But the important thing here is I think it's a lot of people try to put this on Joey's father. And that's really not the case. Were people upset? Sure, your sister's going to get married, a guy backs out. People don't like that. It's disrespectful. There's honor involved. But you also got to understand that Nicky Scarfo was a fucking maniac and wanted to kill a ton of people, and he did kill a ton of people. And Nicky Scarfo was a jealous guy, and he didn't want Salvi Testa getting credit for anything, because I'm Nicky Scarfo, I'm the boss. Why is everybody talking about this kid like he's an up-and-coming whatever the fuck? And so secretly, that's what Scarfo does. He kills him for that reason. And he sort of lays it off as, no, I did this because out of respect for Joey's father and his family and all this. But I think in reality, Nicky Scarfo just didn't want anybody getting any accolades, and he definitely didn't want anybody getting attention. And I don't think necessarily that Joey had any aspirations of teaming up and taking over a crime family. Joey's not that kind of guy. And I think people should really stop listening to the gossip, and I think people should really stop listening to what the FBI says, because I think the FBI is way off on a lot of things, and that's just the truth. All right, did Russell Bufalino have part in the conspiracy against Kennedy? He did, but in a different kind of way. He's the guy that kind of helped set it up, I think. We're not going to talk a lot about that today, nor are we in general as far as this goes, because there were other players that were involved and other people that had things to gain from that. But was he involved? Of course he was. He was a very powerful guy. He could get a lot of things done. He facilitated the transportation of the guns that were used to kill Kennedy. So there you go. All right, what plot points were missing from the movie The Irishman? There were a bunch of plot points, believe it or not. I think one of the biggest miscarriages of justice with this film is that they did not show the moving of the guns from the airfield to Texas. It's alleged that Frank Sheeran used the weapons to get to the actual shooters in that assassination. I think that there needed to be more of a parallel between the Kennedys and Hoffa. I think there needed to be a parallel with Carlos Marcello and what the Kennedys did to him. I think they could have shown more Senate committee hearings of Bobby Kennedy busting the mafia's balls. I think they should have showed Joe Kennedy and his associations with the mob. I think they should have shown just the ABCD of how the Kennedys connected to the mob in general, and how the Kennedys connected to Hoffa. I think if you show that, then the story is complete. I could have gladly accepted a half an hour of the film not being at the end with Frank Sheeran just sitting there mumbling, stumbling, drooling all over his prick. I could have dealt with that a whole lot better. I think the fact that they said they sort of showed Russell Bufalino dying in prison, that's not true. He died at home. He didn't die in prison. So they took a lot of liberties with the actual book itself, and they took a lot of liberties with history, and that's kind of the problem that I had. And I think if you had shown 5 or 10 items to sort of connect the dots, I think it would have really made for an epic movie. I really do. I have seen it a second time since then, and the second time I didn't like it any better than the first. It's not a mob movie. Anybody that wants to see it for its mafia stuff, it's not a mob movie. It's a very sort of political movie, and it's not even really that because they left out so much. So it's just one of those things. See it for yourself and sort of kind of let me know what you think. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to get to part 2 of the Kennedys. Stay tuned. On a given week, I'm out of town a lot. Whether it's Philadelphia, it's New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, wherever the case may be, I'm always looking for a place where I can sit down and have a great dinner. Ambiance is key. Price is obviously key. But the most important thing is the food good? And there's a place I want to tell you about today. It's called Saltwater at Margate. If you are going down to the shore, because I know a lot of people in Philadelphia go to the shore, especially Margate, you're missing out on a great restaurant if you haven't been there. The name is Saltwater Margate. It's at 9401 Ventnor Avenue, Margate City, New Jersey. The phone number there is 609-289-8078. You can also visit them online at saltwatermargate.com. This place is unbelievable. Not only is the food absolutely superb, the price is great too. They're renowned for their pizza and their gnocchi. They have all kinds of different things from mussels to roast pork and Italian fare. So do yourself a favor, do me a favor, go and visit Saltwater Margate. You will not be disappointed. It is a place that I think at some point, if not already, there's going to be lines out the door and around the block. So if you're down on the shore, stop in, go to Saltwater Margate. At least check them out online at saltwatermargate.com. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are going to be talking about the second part of the Kennedys, the Bobby Kennedy hit, the JFK hit, and a bunch of other things Kennedy related. It's going to be a lot of information, and it's going to be a little bit all over the place, just giving you a heads up. So we really got to begin by kind of mentioning what we talked about last week. Listen, the Mafia was pissed, the CIA was pissed, Lyndon Johnson was pissed. And John F. Kennedy was really in a no-win situation. It also didn't help that the Kennedys were hanging out, that John F. Kennedy was hanging out with Frank Sinatra, Sam Giancana, and Giancana was consistently getting caught at Sinatra's Cal Naval Lodge, and that created a lot of problems for JFK. And really what Sinatra provided Kennedy, besides votes and friends, was girls, hookers, whatever, and it was a safe place for Kennedy to meet mob guys and etc. What really concerned Bobby Kennedy was that his brother was making his arrangements look way too obvious. The broads, the booze, the girls, the Hollywood people, the mobsters. Kennedy just wasn't good at keeping it on the DL. The fact that they used, like I said, Sinatra to get the votes, and then through Sinatra, Kennedy would get hooked up with whores, including Marilyn Monroe and other people. Monroe, who actually was completely head over heels for JFK, absolutely refused to take a back seat to Jackie Kennedy and really created a problem for Bobby Kennedy. He just wanted to sort of his brother to put it in a fucking notch, and he wouldn't listen. Also in the background was Bobby's assault on the Mafia. I think if I had to frame it sort of in particular kind of setting, it's just that Kennedy was having issues with everybody around him, and he failed on multiple levels to really keep honing in and keep it quiet. And also the civil rights movement was kind of coming into full swing, and that terrified old racist Republican senators. It always did. It always had. This is why Martin Luther King was killed, Medgar Evers, and a lot of other people. And this was something that also mitigated some of the problems, or at least initiated even more problems for him. John F. Kennedy was really reckless in a lot of different ways. And he never really put sort of his brother in check and just calmed him the fuck down. I think if he had, things probably would have I think things would have ended differently, and it always sort of confused me. I mean, I think John F. Kennedy really felt that the mob could not control his destiny. I mean, he got the votes, he got in, they can't do anything to me now, and he was wrong. And that's also likely why he let Bobby sort of go at them, because that's the only thing I could come up with certifiably in my brain as to why he just didn't put a stop to Bobby. But the problem for both of them was that it wasn't just the mob who reached their fill with the Kennedy bullshit. It was government, the CIA, and a lot of other things. April 4th, 1961, Bobby Kennedy directs the U.S. Justice Department to arrest Carlos Marcello. At the time, Marcello was sort of tying up loose ends with the Immigration Department. And keep in mind, this was mid-swing into Bobby Kennedy's tirades, his Senate committee hearings, and him pulling every mobster known to man in and out of court. And any mobster he could put under the lights, he was going to. It was bad enough that he was going after Jimmy Hoffa, but then the second that Bobby sort of goes after Carlos Marcello, the game totally changes. If you read sort of the loose ends about what happened with Marcello and Kennedy, it really doesn't tell the entire story, and that's what I'm going to give you. Carlos Marcello was not simply arrested outside the immigration office. That's what the government tells you. That's what the public has sort of told you. But in fact, he was actually kidnapped by Bobby Kennedy's cronies. A white pillowcase was tossed over his head. Then he gets placed on a plane, and he gets thrown out the fucking door at 5,000 feet with a parachute. I don't think we've ever seen that happen before, but like I said, imagine you're Carlos Marcello, you're coming out of somewhere, you get picked up, a pillowcase goes on your head, next thing you know, you're on a plane, the door opens, and they push you out of the fucking plane. That's exactly what Bobby did. And Bobby just didn't direct these people to arrest him and just drop him off somewhere. They threw him out of a fucking airplane. And Bobby thought that with Carlos Marcello stranded somewhere in the middle of the Guatemalan desert jungle, that the problem was pretty much over with. But the problem is that Carlos Marcello ends up getting back into the country and is absolutely irate and wants them dead. Marcello would then be consistently dragged to and from court with accusations that he bribed this person and that person to kind of be able to stay in the country legally. So now you've infuriated Carlos Marcello, and listen, there's a lot of things you could do to a guy, but you kidnap him off the street and throw him out of a fucking airplane. What do you expect to happen? And that is a true story. So Marcello has a serious axe to grind, and the mob was particularly pissed that Bobby Kennedy would go to those extremes. It's one thing to drag a guy in and out of court. It's another to throw a guy out of a fucking airplane. It's also worth noting that there is a connection between Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby, and we're going to kind of get to this portion of it now. So who is Jack Ruby? Jack Rubenstein was a Dallas fringe player, a mob associate, and a nightclub owner. He had long ties to the mafia, running nightclubs for the outfit and for actually Carlos Marcello himself. Ruby was also a narcotics trafficker, loan shark, gambler, pimp, and he had brothels all under his control. And Lee Harvey Oswald's uncle was actually a fringe player who not only worked for Jack Ruby, but worked directly for Carlos Marcello. So there's your connection that's certifiable. And so anytime we talk about conspiracy theories, it's really only conspiracy when you can't physically, logically, factually connect the dots. And in this case, you can connect all these dots. It's common knowledge. It's not fabricated. It's not an assertion. It's fact. So you really don't have a conspiracy here. You have a lot of truth. But Ruby was essentially the front guy for a bunch of different mobsters. It's also worth noting that a few months prior to the hit on JFK, Jack Ruby made several suspect phone calls to some seriously connected guys, one of those being Nafio Pecora. If you don't know who Nafio Pecora is, Nafio Pecora was a guy who was sort of the top lieutenant of Carlos Marcello. He handled Marcello's businesses and business messages and etc. Those calls were brought up by the Warren Commission, which proved that Jack Ruby did in fact know Carlos Marcello incredibly well. Ruby also made 2 calls on November 7th and November 8th. Those calls were to Robert Baker, who was an aide to Jimmy Hoffa. So now you've got Ruby, prior to the hit, calling Marcello's people and calling Jimmy Hoffa's people. Now, while that can be circumspect and that can be argued either way, let's get further into that. Baker had done time and been released back in June of 1963, so he's a convicted felon and a criminal, etc. The fact that prior to these phone calls, Ruby had never met or known Baker in his life, so he had no such relationship with Baker prior to these phone calls. So all of a sudden, Jack Ruby just so happens to be calling Baker, who handles Jimmy Hoffa's business. Little circumspect, little strange. The FBI would speak to Baker in 1964. He didn't remember the conversation and said maybe it had to do with the labor union problems, but he really didn't remember the context of the conversation. So after the Warren Commission investigates it, they make the claim that Ruby was not associated with organized crime at all, which is laughable when you consider that the who's who of mob would call ahead and get girls before they arrived in Dallas through Jack Ruby. It's also public knowledge that Jack Ruby had business dealings with Carlos Marcello, Santos Traficante, and a bunch of other people. So the fact that the Warren Commission is sort of burying the fact that Jack Ruby, by saying that he had no relationships with organized crime, is a fucking joke. That just tells you that some of those in the Warren Commission, actually the head of the Warren Commission, which was Alan Dulles at the time, was burying that information. In many ways, like I said, this is one of the more corrupt parts of the Warren Commission findings. So if we accept that Ruby was an associate of the mafia, we accept that he knew Oswald, and also to further prove that, there were multiple witnesses that testified that prior to the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald were seen together meeting at his nightclub in Dallas. So there's your connection there. It's also once again worth noting that the main witness to this meeting was found dead on the side of the road months after she confirmed that she saw Oswald and Ruby meeting together. What makes the Warren Commission findings so funny to me is that they said none of his associations in Chicago were of organized crime relation. However, their reference to a Ruby friend who testified that he didn't have organized crime was actually a fucking hitman for the Chicago outfit. So once again, we see the Warren Commission is not being honest about what's going on. So the findings lose value immediately, at least for me. So it's a proven fact that information contained in the Warren Commission was either altered or fixed or amended or withheld before it ever landed on the desk. So you have like sort of the commission's findings, and then there's a black pen that edits out stuff. redact stuff. So whatever was said about Ruby prior to that, it was given to the rest of the commission with those things taken out. So that's sort of, how it goes. And it essentially means that the CIA and Lyndon Johnson's altered the facts to support non-complicit assassination theory. They did not want the American public to think that anyone other than Lee Harvey Oswald was in on the assassination. The FBI acted really in conjunction with the facts surrounding Ruby. So in other words, they backed it up by trying to keep it sealed. For instance, the Warren Commission did not receive a transcript of the interview with Louis Kuttner, who was a Chicago lawyer who told them that Ruby had notorious relationships with the mafia. And when the FBI shuffled the papers to the commission, it was said that Ruby had, once again, no affiliations, no other information could be found. So they buried Louis Kuttner's testimony as to what he told them. He's saying, Ruby didn't know anybody, but it's bullshit. Or no, excuse me. Kuttner was telling them that Ruby was notorious. He had lots of mob connections, and they buried that. And then they came back and said, well, we had an interview with him, and he said, he didn't really know anything. So once again, they're burying and covering up. So there's a conspiracy right there for you. That is a conspiracy in every sense of the word. Another instance is a failed teletype from the FBI that Yaris, who was a hitman for the outfit, had grown up with Ruby. He had business ties with Ruby, and he was called on the eve of the assassination by one of Ruby's associates about an emergency meeting which was going to take place on the East Coast, or was going to take place between East Coast and West Coast bosses that had to have an emergency meeting, which also included Santos Traficante. So here we go on the eve of the assassination. The heads of the mob are all getting together in a secret meeting. Coincidence? I don't really think so. There's a guy by the name of Dutz Merritt. Dutz Merritt was actually, if you've never heard of him, that's actually Lee Harvey Oswald's uncle. He was a loan shark, a bookmaker. Through Jack Ruby, he goes to work directly for Carlos Marcello. Then there's David Ferry. Who is David Ferry? David Ferry was an investigator for Carlos Marcello who grew up with Lee Harvey Oswald. So the connections are pretty insane, but we need to get to Oswald. If you want to look up stuff about David Ferry, go right ahead. There's a million things you can look up. Lee Harvey Oswald, look, he was a former Marine. He was a marksman. He scored 212, which designated him as a sharpshooter. As he left the military, he sort of heads to Russia at age 20 in October of, I think, 58 or 59. I think it was 59. The press and the government would have you believe that he was a secret Marxist, but really the truth is he was a spy for the CIA. He was also a spy for the KGB at the same time, so he was double dealing. Like I said, dual spy, and he worked in an effort to help Russia, but he also was trying to help the United States as well. Documents released in 1994 all but proved that Oswald was not just some gun-toting fucking nut job. The CIA has denied it for years. However, once again, when asked under oath that the CIA withheld documents related to any sort of tandem action between Oswald and the CIA, they denied it, but in fact, documents proved that that is the case. Donald Trump, believe it or not, in fact, blocked these documents when he took office and put a 3-year hold on all documents related to the Kennedy assassination. So once again, we see the government trying to bury as much as they can. What conspiracy theorists jump to all the time is that Oswald did in fact have a high security clearance while he worked on the U-2's radar systems. He was graded well by the military with superior intellect, which directly contradicts the military's records of him being slow, inept, being court-martialed, etc. So we have files that show that Oswald was completely the opposite of what the government alleges. I mean, so you essentially have the government saying one thing, the military sort of burying things, and et cetera. It just doesn't pan out. So I mean, it is what it is. It definitely is what it is. It's also noting sort of that the marks and the military grades that Oswald got were sort of buried in CIA files, and they were released in the early 2000s, and nobody's really reported on that, but you can find out all your information, on Google for that kind of stuff. So what's, like I said, what's been reported is not accurate. It's also worth noting that Oswald really had an easy time getting into Russia and an easy time getting out of Russia. And this is like right around the Cold War and bullshit. And it's still fresh. It's still hostile. And it just, if you think about it, an American with military security clearances just does not walk into Russia, does not just go to work for the KGB. It just doesn't make sense. So he works for the KGB for a long time, and he just easily walks out of Russia. Like, if you know anything about the KGB, it just doesn't work like that. So just during the time period, what was going on politically, I just don't think any of that was possible. Oswald's also best friend in Russia was a guy by the name of Alexander Ziger, who was also an alleged plant in Russia working for the CIA. As Oswald actually leaves, Alan Dulles, who then was the head of the CIA, arranged for Ziger to get his children out of Russia before giving Ziger a flight out of Russia to head back to Argentina, where he was originally from. Dulles was also the head of the Warren Commission. So there you go. Once again, there's another dot that's a little kind of creepy to me. In 1975, a memo was released which was discussing Oswald in coded terms as an ex-Marine, a defector who was working in tandem with the CIA and secretly working at a radio plant in Minsk, which makes complete sense because Oswald was living where? In Minsk. He was also, where was he working? At a radio plant. It's long been asserted that Oswald was sent to Russia to meddle in relations between the United States and Russia. I'm not sure how much I believe all that, but it was Eisenhower who sent him there. And you can trace back the friendship between Joe Kennedy and Eisenhower, which goes back to the ports. So once again, we're seeing a big, serious fucking connection that's a little creepy. But I could spend the next decade going over the weird coincidences, the connections, but I don't want to do that. Let's get right to the point. In 1960, right after the Cuban Revolution, the CIA hired former FBI agent Robert Mayhew to approach Johnny Roselli about hitting Fidel Castro. This is the first direct link between the mob and the government, and this was done with the knowledge of John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy just wanted him fucking dead after they fucked up the Cuban Missile Crisis. Roselli would then introduce Mayhew to Santos Trafficante and Sam Giancana. They then used George Bush's front company called Zapata Oil to train for the various ideas and missions that they had wanted to attempt to the facilitation of killing Castro. The land that they used in Florida to train snipers was owned by Santos Trafficante. You can't make this shit up. Then in 1968, for whatever reason, the government went after Roselli and trying to expel him from the country. I think it's long believed that the long end here is that Bobby Kennedy wanted to try to close off all contacts with the mafia and the Kennedy family, and that's why they tried to get Johnny Roselli out of the country. It's also worth noting that this was some months before Bobby Kennedy actually gets killed. And Bobby Kennedy obviously gets killed on June 6th of 1968. So it doesn't take rocket science to see kind of what happens to Kennedy. He uses the mob to get where he got. He allows his brother to relentlessly go after them, attempts to cover up any relations. And the problem really wasn't John F. Kennedy's appearance of being soft and rubbing the mob wrong. It was essentially biting the hand that fed him. It wasn't so much that Kennedy looked soft in front of the Iron Curtain. It's the fact that the people that got him into the power to begin with, he fucking bit them and he shit all over them. But what we know is this. At least according to the alleged facts, Kennedy gets killed on November 22nd, 1963 at 12:30 p.m., allegedly by Lee Harvey Oswald from atop the book depository. Kennedy would be rushed to Parkland Hospital where he would obviously would be pronounced dead. The new conspiracy has the FBI and the CIA alleging that Oswald acted alone, and 7 weeks prior, Oswald arrived in Mexico City to meet with the Russian consulate and Cuban consulate. So the theory is that he acted alone, the government knew, and sort of didn't do anything to stop it. So we've gone from he's a single shooter to he's visiting Cuban and Russian spy people to try to kill Kennedy that way, and then the government sort of tailed him, knew what was going on, and did nothing to stop it. So it's amazing how this conspiracy theory keeps kind of like turning on its head 360 degrees. But for me, I have a hard time buying that theory. There are too many other coincidences for me to think Oswald acted completely alone. If you think about it, and you think about Jack Ruby, he scoped out the police station and was allowed to enter the police station numerous times to get the layout of the facility. It doesn't make sense to me when you consider Ruby and Oswald knew each other, and Ruby was close to the mob guys, and Ruby and Oswald met numerous times prior. It's not really too hard to believe that Ruby is sent there by Sam Giancana and other people, and Carlos Marcello and Santos Trafficante, to handle Oswald and kill him. But why? I think there's an easy way of sort of looking at this in a smaller picture without getting too crazy about it. The mob and the CIA wanted to silence the one guy who could connect the dots between the mob, the government, the CIA, Cuba, and Kennedy. Does that mean that the mob hired Lee Harvey Oswald? Not necessarily. It means the government used a patsy to commit a crime in collusion with the mafia. I think the government thought the Kennedy reign would pretty much go away if John F. Kennedy was killed. They thought Bobby Kennedy would probably get the message, but what they underestimated was Bobby Kennedy's resolve. After the murder of Kennedy, Bobby was caught on White House tapes accusing Johnson of killing his brother, and also Jackie Kennedy consistently accused the government and Johnson of killing her husband. When Kennedy gets shot, okay, we need to talk about the Zapruder film for 1 second. When Kennedy gets shot, his head clearly lurches backwards. Prior to lurching back, he was shot from behind and he grabs his throat. The second shot comes from the front and his head snaps back. So that's 2 shots. The report first was 1 single shot. So we have a bunch of different stories here about actually what happened. Then after, obviously, the Zapruder film comes out, they said there were 2 shots. How do you account for Connolly getting hit, his wife getting shot and killed? So that's like 4 shots there, right? So all in the car who survived said there was a flurry of shots. They didn't they didn't agree with the government's assertion on what happened whatsoever. If you're shot from behind, you lurch forward, not backwards. When a bullet exits and expands from the exit plate, when a bullet hits you in the fucking head, it expands from where it exits, not where it enters. But what's strange about the Zapruder footage is that Kennedy is shot multiple times. However, the papers have always claimed he was only shot once. The mere fact that autopsy photos also show multiple bullet holes directly contradicts what the government has said. Not 1, not 2, closer to 3. I don't believe for a second he was shot by Oswald. Rather, I think he was shot from another location, probably the grassy knoll. I don't believe the Bonanno bullshit that he was shot from a storm drain. I think that's all nonsense. I know Johnny Roselli was long associated with taking place in the hit, but I don't think there's really anything to corroborate that. But it's, once again, it's simple rudimentary examinations that were not completed, not done the right way. These are examinations that are done by guys that have been in the field for 20 years. Simple things like measuring trajectories never took place. It's basic fundamentals of doing an autopsy. You align where the shots enter, where they exit, and the examiners failed even to do the basic minimum, which probably is more resultive of the fact that the FBI was controlling how the autopsy and how some of the paperwork was handled. New revelations say that the FBI was really on top of Oswald. They knew who he was. They were watching him. I think this is more of an effort from the FBI to cover their ass. But, it's weird. The FBI is like watching this guy, following him. He's crazy. And then all of a sudden they suddenly drop the ball. Or maybe the FBI knew, the CIA knew, and they just did nothing to stop it because they wanted Kennedy to be gone. I don't believe that either. So, if we believe that Oswald acted alone, then we have to blame the CIA and the FBI for being complicit for at least allowing it to happen, right? So either way you look at it, there's a massive conspiracy theory here. If Oswald didn't act alone, then the government stepped in to cover it up, which I think we can all agree at this point they did. And you have a massive crime of epic proportions here. Why people are so quick to take the mob out of this is hilarious to me. Documents recently released show that J. Edgar Hoover, who was very, very friendly with mob guys, in a memo told his people that we need to make the American public believe that Lee Harvey Oswald did this and nobody else. So here he is trying to cover up a crime. If that does not speak volumes to you, I really don't know what will. You have the head of the FBI at the time telling everybody that he needs to cover up the story with Oswald. We need to just totally blame Oswald for this. There you go. You get a conspiracy right there. And it sort of proves that Oswald was just a part of a bigger wheel in motion at the time. Then again, why the fuck would you keep those files laying around? I mean, surely the FBI would have buried those files. It's just strange. But we got to go back to the Mexico thing for 1 second. So Oswald's in Mexico 7 weeks to the prior to the hit on Kennedy. He meets with the Russians, specifically the KGB's assassination branch, which is a little fucked up. That's known because the CIA sent a cable regarding the information. That cable was directly to and from James Angleton, who at the time was a CIA spy. All this proves is that the CIA was well aware of the situation, so at the bare minimum, you got to make the CIA partly culpable for what happened to Kennedy. 2 days after Oswald gets arrested, Hoover asks the Dallas Police Department to protect Oswald at all costs. Yet somehow Jack Ruby gets sort of let in there, and we know what happens from there. So we know why people in the powers that be wanted Kennedy dead. We know why the government wanted him gone. But what about Bobby Kennedy? How does Bobby Kennedy fit into this? Well, Bobby Kennedy was acting more reckless than a trucker giving handjobs to undercover cops. It's also would be a matter of time for Bobby Kennedy, too. Those within the power felt that Bobby Kennedy would be effectively stopped when John F. Kennedy was killed. However, his relentless anti-mafia crusade, his involvement with Marilyn Monroe, because he was fucking her too, and the threats to expose, and what Marilyn was doing was she was basically threatening to expose the Kennedys. She said, if Jack doesn't leave fucking Jackie, then I'm going to expose the mafia, the government, everything, and what's going on here. And that's one of the reasons why I believe that Marilyn Monroe was killed. And I could get into that, but that's sort of a whole other thing. But this is the problem that the people have. And the other issue that the government has is that Bobby Kennedy wants to run to be president. Okay, not only does he want to be president, but he wants to take the CIA and downgrade them and just make them into an intelligence department rather than being clandestine murderers. I just want them to be information, and that's it. That infuriated the CIA. He also wanted to get the shit out of fucking Vietnam, which infuriated everybody else. So you have a bunch of wheels here moving. So Bobby Kennedy gets in this position, and something has to be done. Enter Sirhan Sirhan. On June 5th of 1968, just after he won the South Dakota and California presidential primary, he would be allegedly shot by Sirhan Sirhan at the Ambassador Hotel shortly after midnight. What makes this murder very, very fucked up is that Sirhan Sirhan was in front of Kennedy, and Kennedy was shot from behind. And he was shot right behind his right ear, which is typical mob hit. I'm not saying the mob did it, but that's how the mob kills, and that's a signature of professional execution. So unless Sirhan Sirhan had 12-foot arms and reached around, it's totally fucking impossible that Sirhan Sirhan shot Bobby Kennedy. At the time, Sirhan Sirhan was 24 years old. He was a Palestinian with Jordanian citizenship. He was born in Israel and by many accounts was a Zionist. When authorities searched his house, they allegedly found diaries with an entry marked on May 19th of 1968 that his determination was to eliminate Bobby Kennedy was more or less had become an unshakable obsession to him. Robert Kennedy must be assassinated. Robert Kennedy must be assassinated. That's what he wrote in his journal. The government fully sort of tried to back its claim, and that, they said that when they arrested Sirhan Sirhan, they found a newspaper article in his pocket, which was regarding Kennedy's support for Israel. Allegedly, in 1989, Sirhan Sirhan told David Frost in prison that his only connection to Kennedy was his sole support of Israel and his deliberate attempts to send those 50 bombers to Israel to obviously do harm to the Palestinians. So he makes it a political thing. The government has maintained for fucking 40 years or whatever it is that Sirhan Sirhan's motivation was Middle Eastern politics, but a lot of scholars disagree completely, as do I, with this. As the government gave Sirhan Sirhan a polygraph, and they did this to obtain information to find out if he was a lone conspirator, and and they wanted to also know how exactly he got his hands on a .22 caliber pistol. And he failed his polygraph on all fronts by saying, I'm the only lone guy, I got the gun from this guy. He failed everything. It's worth noting that the night Kennedy was killed, 3 CIA officers were in attendance and actually filmed when Kennedy got hit. All 3 worked together at the 1963 M-Wave, which was the CIA's main anti-Castro station based in Miami. The 3 were, like I said, M-Wave Chief Operations. These are the guys that were there. Chief Operations Officer David Morales, Chief of Maritime Operations Gordon Campbell, and Chief of Psychological Warfare Operations George, and this is Greek, so I'm going to fuck this up, Joannides. I probably pronounced that wrong. All right, so with George Joannides, it might explain sort of a Manchurian Candidate type of theory using acid, which I don't want to go into all of that details because a lot of people think about that. MK Ultra, which is they gave people acid and et cetera to try to control them. So at the time, the CIA was, like I said, using MKUltra to try to brainwash people, using acid for the basis of controlling people to kill somebody on their command. Now, a lot of people have used that theory. I don't necessarily believe that, but Sirhan has no sort of memory as to what happened that night. What's more suspect is that Campbell, the real Campbell, had been dead 6 years, and what it was someone had gone to the Bobby Kennedy thing at the Ambassador Hotel using a fake ID, but he wasn't the only one. Upon further investigation, Joanides and Morales were not there either. It was 2 others who used fake IDs. The 2 would be Michael Roman and Frank Owens, who are identified as Bulova watch salesmen in the hotel. How the fuck do watch salesmen get in the hotel, get to that part where Kennedy is? But what's even more suspect about that, in case you didn't know this, was that the CIA had used the Bulova watch salesman front for a decade as a cover-up. So once again, it just coincidences, maybe, maybe not. So let's talk about Bobby Kennedy's wounds. First, it's long been said that Sirhan was in front of Kennedy when he was shot. This leads to the idea that there were 2 shooters. Thomas Noguchi, who was a coroner, stated that the final shot was fired behind his right ear and had been fired at a distance of less than 1 inch, which means somebody placed a fucking barrel to a gun to the back of his head. He also stated that he found powder burns on Kennedy's head and jacket, which meant, once again, it was placed directly against him. Bullets taken from Kennedy's body did not match those from Sirhan's gun. 7 experts in 1971 testified that none of the bullets matched. Bullet holes were found in the door frames, and photos were taken of those door frames. However, all 8 shots taken by Sirhan were accounted for at that time, but the other 7 weren't. Those protecting Kennedy said repeatedly that Sirhan never got within 10 feet of Bobby Kennedy, that it was impossible. He never approached him, which totally removes him from the murder itself. In fact, in 1976, the Supreme Court ordered an expert examination to further explain the second gunman theory. In 2008, an eyewitness came forward and testified that there was, in fact, a second gunman. So once again, what the government alleges and what the true facts are 2 different fucking things. In 2007, forensic expert Phil Von Prague analyzed the audio tape from the shooting. He found that a second gun was definitely used, and he found that 13 shots were actually fired, even though Sirhan's gun only held 8 rounds. Sirhan had no chance to reload, so someone else was shooting as well. He also found that the timing of the shots were physically impossible from Sirhan's gun alone. Wes Dooley and Paul Pegas examined the same exact audio that Van Prague did, and they agreed with him fully. Ballistic expert Eddie Brixson agreed completely with both assertions made from the other experts. Then in 2012, Sirhan's lawyers attempted to file in the U.S. District Court, saying that Sirhan did not fire the shots that killed Kennedy, but there were more shooters. It was the 4th and final sort of appeal in a series of federal briefs fired under habeas corpus. The judge in that case denied the petition. Then we moved to June 5th, 2018. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Bobby Kennedy's son, goes to visit Sirhan in prison. Kennedy meets with Sirhan for over 3.5 hours. For 18 months prior, Kennedy digested all he could about his father's death, from the autopsy reports to the factual stuff, etc., etc. So he does his research, and he reads the autopsy reports, and he doesn't believe anything that he's seeing. He even went so far as to look up old witnesses and those who were there, and something left him questioning about the murder more than giving him a resolution. He even digested the million police reports, and nothing that he read added up. Kennedy has never really discussed what him and Sirhan talked about, but he left that meeting knowing one thing, that what Sirhan said and what the government said are 2 different things, and he did not believe Sirhan killed his father. The only thing Kennedy relayed to the media was that he didn't want to see a man who didn't commit a crime die in prison for something he did not do. Kennedy later called for a reinvestigation into the case, and now that's being joined by his sister Kathleen Kennedy Townsend. In 2016, a video released of Sirhan, which can actually be seen on YouTube, he says he never once pointed the gun at Kennedy, but he did fire a couple of shots. He said he was never really close enough to Kennedy to hit him. And the shots that he fired never hit Kennedy. They went straight up into the air, which is backed up by ballistic experts. He said his memory is a bit hazy and that he doesn't ever remember shooting at Bobby Kennedy. But keep in mind, Sirhan has been up for parole a dozen times and he always gets denied. And so, that's sort of how everything happened to them. I think it's highly suspect and highly creepy how a lot of these things have happened to the Kennedys. Karma's a fucking bitch, but as we see, I've never really believed Sirhan did it. I think the senator that I can't remember his name right now, but the senator that was in the car that was with Bobby Kennedy and got shot in his fucking head, who lived, has always said Sirhan did not get close enough to Kennedy to do this. There was too much protection, and so he refutes everything. So if you have the people that were standing there when he's killed testifying and saying that this guy didn't do this, then what you have is a cover-up. And that's exactly what the biggest problem about all this has been. Every president that seems to come along keeps burying it. They don't want it out because they don't want the embarrassment of either being involved or being complicit in the cover-up. Now, as far as Marilyn Monroe, I'm going to go back to that for like 1 second. So Marilyn was banging JFK, banging Bobby, and she wouldn't shut up. And a lot of people have speculated over the years that she got a hot dose and was killed. Now, what's very interesting about this is that at the time Marilyn Monroe died, she was not depressed. She was not on pills. Bobby Kennedy, per the White House documents, visited her just hours in her home before she died. Then following that, Peter Lawford, who was married to Kennedy's sister, was used allegedly in the cover-up to go over and put pills in the house and make it look like she killed herself. I can't prove it, but what I've read time and time again, especially in one of Peter Lawford's biographies, is that he had often told people that what happened with Marilyn Monroe and his family-in-law disturbed him for the rest of his life, and that's ultimately why he thinks he sort of drank himself to death, really, in all terms of it. I know that Peter Lawford's son has also said that his father lived with demons that nobody could ever understand. So it's long been asserted that Bobby Kennedy either killed Marilyn Monroe in some sort of fashion, had the government do it, and then used Peter Lawford to cover it up. And he did that because Marilyn Monroe could tie the Kennedys to the mob. She could tie them to a lot of people. But we're never going to know. We are never going to know for 100% certainty who fucking specifically did this, but I think the reality is I think the government worked in tandem with the mob to take care of it. There are a lot of wheels in motion. A lot of people wanted this to happen, so they get rid of one, then they're hoping the other one would shut the fuck up, and he didn't, and they do the same thing there. So that's your complete package as far as the Kennedy conspiracy stuff. And like I said, I could go on for fucking 10 days doing this kind of stuff, but I think at the end of the day, I just try to put out as much as I can without it being mundane. And if you're curious about any of this stuff, there are a million web pages, a million articles. You can read the article that Robert Kennedy Jr. did in one of the magazines. I think there's some stuff on YouTube where he talks about it. But if the guy's son doesn't believe it and he knows there's a cover-up, chances are it is. And we're never going to find out. I think the closest that we've really gotten is a lot of these teletypes that have been released in a lot of the documents. You can also search these documents for yourself through the Department of Justice. I think there's a couple other sub websites. Like I think the HuffPost has some stuff. There's a bunch of different places. So with that's going to be the Kennedys. I'm going to get out of here. I hope you enjoyed the show. Donate if you can. $1, $2, $5. I'll take anything, even including fucking pesos at this point. It's just to help me travel to go interview people. And we're going to start releasing some of the interviews we have done with some pretty high profile people. I think you're going to enjoy it. But if you can donate, I would appreciate it. And I think that's going to be it. And I will be releasing another show, if not tonight, first thing tomorrow morning or afternoon with Appalachian and sort of digest that a bit. So I just wanted to thank everybody for listening in. I will also be on 2 different radio shows that aren't my own coming up in the next couple weeks. I am going to do the True Crime Podcast with Scott Williams-Collier. If you don't know who he is, look him up. Check YouTube, type in the True Crime Podcast. He's got a great show. He talks about serial killers and crime and stuff like that. It's a fantastic show, one of my favorites. So, all that being said, If you have a question, you want to participate in the Q&A, go over to Facebook. You'll see I'll post Q&A time and shoot. Just ask your question, and I will try to get to your question. If I didn't, it's not because I don't like it, not because I can't answer it, but I get a lot of repetitive questions. All that being said, I wanted to thank everybody for liking, subscribing, checking it out, and anybody who's donated. I really appreciate it. So all that being said, I'm going to get out of here for tonight, and we will be back later on this week with some more stuff.